They say every forbidden secret starts with an innocent moment. But that night, a glance turned into a whisper, and a touch became something we could never take back. What happens when the line between love and taboo blurs so dangerously that it threatens to unravel everything? I don't really know where to start this story, but I always knew our relationship was special. Ever since we were little, there was this connection, this unspoken understanding between us. But I never imagined it would lead to something so intense, so forbidden. It all started one night when we were home alone. The tension was palpable, almost as if the air was charged with electricity. I was in my room reading a book when he came in without knocking, which he never did. He was wearing just a t-shirt and his gym shorts. And something in his eyes told me that tonight wouldn't be like any other. "What are you reading?" he asked. But his voice had a different intonation. Almost a whisper. He sat on my bed, so close that I could smell his perfume. The one that always made my head spin. Nothing important. I answered, my heart pounding. Knowing that this proximity wasn't innocent, our eyes met, and that's when the first shiver ran through me. There was a promise in that look. A promise of something we could never confess out loud. We talked about everything and nothing, but every word seemed to have a double meaning. Every gesture and innuendo when he laughed. His breath brushed my neck, and I felt a wave of heat rise inside me. "Are you cold?" he said, seeing my goosebumps. But he knew very well why I was cold, why I was shivering. "No," I whispered, and that simple word seemed to suspend time. He moved closer, and I felt his knee brush against mine. That touch, that warmth, was like a trigger. We began to play this dangerous game, the one where every gesture could be interpreted two ways. His fingers brushed my arm under the pretense of showing me something in the book, but we both knew it was just an excuse for the touch. The silence that followed each word was heavy with unspoken words, with restrained desire. I placed my hand on his, a gesture of apparent innocence, but laden with all the implications we couldn't express. Then he leaned toward me, his face so close to mine that I could see the details of his eyes, like a mysterious landscape waiting to be explored. "Maybe I should go," he said. But he didn't move. "Maybe not," I said, and my heart skipped a beat that night. We crossed the invisible line that separated brother from sister, innocent from guilty. Each movement was like a dance step, where each step could be an expression of brotherly affection, or something much deeper. More forbidden, we explored this slippery slope where every action could be seen as a simple game between brother and sister, but with an intensity that betrayed innocence. We were two souls trapped in a whirlwind of emotions where every breath a silent confession after that first step into the unknown. Every encounter between us became a game of cat and mouse where every gesture and every word had a double meaning. The next day, the atmosphere was different. There was a palpable tension that had not been there before we were sitting at the table for breakfast, our parents around us. But their presence seemed distant, almost invisible. Our feet touched under the table, and I felt a shiver run through me. A simple contact, but loaded with all the implications of the previous night. "Did you sleep well?" he asked. His gaze fixed on me, a smirk that betrayed our secret. "Very well," I answered, feeling my cheeks redden under the intense of his gaze. It was not a lie, but it was not the whole truth either. I had spent the night reliving every moment. Every sensation in the days that followed, we found excuses to be alone together. The house became our playground. Every room a potential site for these stolen moments in the living room. Our hands brushed under the pretense of sharing the remote in the backyard. He taught me how to throw a ball, his hands guiding mine, his fingers lingering longer than necessary. One afternoon when our parents were out, we were in the kitchen baking cookies. The heat of the oven was nothing compared to the heat rising between us. He approached from behind, under the pretense of helping me mix the dough, his arms encircling mine. Like this, he whispered, his voice so close to my ear. I could feel his warm breath. Our movements were synchronized, but the real dance happened in the space between our bodies, in the silence of unspoken words. Each encounter was a crescendo of tension, each touch a step closer to the inevitable one night. While we were watching a movie, his arm rested on the back of the couch, then gently, almost by accident, on my shoulder. The warmth of his skin through our clothes was like a fire that slowly consumed any reserve. The movie was forgotten, our eyes more often on each other than on the screen. The flickering light of the television cast shadows on our faces, adding a mysterious dimension to the moment. "Are you cold?" he asked, his hand brushing my arm. "No," I answered, but my voice trembled, betraying the excitement and fear of what we were doing. He took my hand, then squeezing it gently, and that simple gesture was like a silent declaration. We spent the rest of the evening in complicit silence, each minute bringing us closer to that point of no return, as the days turned into weeks. Our game of hints and innuendos grew bolder. In the bathroom, as I brushed my teeth, he came in to get a towel, his gaze in the mirror meeting mine, with an intensity that spoke for itself. Each moment was a lesson in restraint and desire and exploration, of what could be said without words, what could be felt without touch. We were accomplices in this ballet of forbidden sensations, navigating between innocence and transgression. And every night in the darkness of my room, I thought back to those moments, my mind filling the gaps with images and sensations. I dared not confess even to myself. The suspense of our game grew more and more unbearable. Each encounter a step further in this forbidden dance. One evening, when the house was silent, I was in my room pretending to read when he came in, pretending to look for a book. "Have you seen my book?" he asked, but his eyes weren't looking for a book. They were fixed on me with an intensity that spoke volumes. "No, not here," I answered, my heart pounding. He came closer, and in that small space, every breath seemed amplified. He took a book from my desk, but instead of leaving, he sat on my bed next to me. The tension was palpable, as if the air itself were holding its breath. He began to lean through the book, but his gestures were distracted, his thoughts elsewhere. "Maybe we should watch a movie," he suggested, his voice low, almost a whisper. I nodded, knowing full well that it wasn't the movie that interested him. We turned on the computer, but the movie was never our real entertainment. Sitting side by side, the warmth of his body so close. Every movement, even the most innocuous, became an excuse to touch under the covers. Our feet found each other, and that contact was like a signal. He placed his hand on my leg, a gesture that could be interpreted as comforting, but which in the context of our secret was loaded with meaning. The movie was playing, but our eyes met more often than the screen. Each time an electric charge seemed to pass between us. He whispered something, a question about the movie, but his voice was so close, so intimate, that it seemed detached from all reality. When the movie ended, he didn't move. We were in darkness, the only light being the screen that switched to the menu, illuminating his features in an almost surreal way. "It's getting late," I said, but my voice held no conviction. "Or maybe just the perfect hour," he replied, and leaned in close, his breath warm on my face. That moment, suspended between innocence and sin, was charged with all the implications of what we were doing. There were no words after that, just a silence where every breath was a confession. Our bodies drew closer, and in that proximity, every sensation was amplified. His breath against my neck, his hand sliding slowly up my arm. It was all a language without words, an invitation to explore what we knew was forbidden. We lay there, his body against mine, the warmth of his presence enveloping us. Every movement was a test of our limits, a game where the risk of being discovered added to the intensity of the moment in that darkness. Every gesture, every touch was a story in itself, a chapter in our silent confession, a promise of shared secrets that no one else could understand. We spent the night like this in silent communion, where every touch was a word in a secret language. Every breath, an unfinished sentence morning found us still entwined the outside world, unaware of what had happened in the privacy of my room, and, as day broke, bringing with it reality, we knew that this night had been the beginning of an adventure, where every encounter would be a challenge, every moment, a risk. The next day, the tension between us had morphed into something palpable, like a taut rope ready to snap every glance. Every mundane gesture was charged with. That night, we had shared a night of silent exploration and whispered secrets. We were in the kitchen preparing dinner when he approached from behind, pretending to help. With the vegetables, his proximity was electrifying, every movement of his hands on the knives, or vegetables seemed like a dance around me, an invitation to continue what we had started. "You cut carrots like this," he whispered, his voice so close to my ear that I shivered. His hand brushed mine, guiding the knife in a gesture that could have been innocent, but was anything but yes. "Like this?" I answered, my voice, trembling, aware of every touch, every shared breath. Our parents were in the next room, their pres making every move, bolder, riskier. The danger of being caught added an extra layer of suspense to our game of innuendo. Dinner was an eerie affair, our eyes meeting under the table, a silent conversation where every unspoken word was a promise of moments to come after dinner as our parents watched TV. He motioned for me to follow him upstairs on some pretext in the hallway, away from prying ears. He took my hand, his touch like an electric shock. Come," he said, and we entered his room, closing the door softly behind us. The tension was so thick that the air seemed to vibrate. He sat on his bed, patting the spot next to him. His voice meant more than just the words sitting next to him. I could smell his perfume, the one that had always made my head spin. He began to talk about ordinary things, but each word was a veil for what we both knew was our real subject. "Do you remember when we were little?" he asked. But his eyes said something else. It was an opening to a shared past, but also to a present that was so much more complicated. "Yeah, sure," I said, my voice barely a whisper, aware that we were crossing an invisible line. He picked up a book from his nightstand, but instead of reading it, he set it on my lap, his fingers brushing my skin. The gesture, so simple, was saturated with innuendo, with unspoken promises. Time seemed suspended, each second stretched. He leaned closer, his mouth so close to my ear that I heard his breath before his words. "We shouldn't," he said, but his tone wasn't one of dissuasion. It was an invitation to defy what we shouldn't do. We stayed there in that tension, each breath a chapter in our secret story. His fingers began to play with a lock of my hair, a gesture that could be seen as fraternal, but that in this context was fraught with all possible implications. Silence became our accomplice. Each gesture a word in a language that only we understood. We spent hours like this in that subtle dance, of illusions and contacts, each moment a step further in this forbidden adventure. When night fell, we knew that what we were doing was more than children's games. It was the beginning of a story that we could never share with the world, a secret that bound us more than any family or social bond. And as we parted to go to sleep, our eyes met one last time, a silent promise that this night was only the beginning of something much bigger, much more dangerous. The next few days were a cascade of stolen moments, loaded glances, and secret encounters. Each moment spent together was like a turning page in a forbidden book. But the suspense of our game turned into an inevitable tragedy. One night, when the house was plunged into silence, we found ourselves in the kitchen late after our parents had gone to bed. The air was heavy with our secrets, our every move a whisper of what we had shared. He grabbed my hand, dragging me outside under the pretext of getting some air. The night was cold, but the warmth of our closeness made everything else insignificant. We walked to the old oak tree at the bottom of the garden, a place of our childhood games. Now the scene of our transgression under that tree out of sight, our gestures took on a new dimension, each touch a chapter in our doom story. He leaned into me, our breaths mingling in the icy air, creating a cloud of steam that seemed to capture our desire. "We can't go on like this," he said, but his voice trembled, not with regret, but with the intensity of what he felt. I know I whispered, but my words were a defiance of reality, a refusal of the inevitable. We kissed a kiss that was both a confession and a promise of moments we could never live out in the open. The kiss was like the final chapter of a book we wanted to read over and over again, but knew we had to close. However, fate chose that moment to strike. The beam of a flashlight caught us, illuminating our secret in the night. It was our father, unable to sleep, who had decided to check why the kitchen light was still on. The light revealed more than just a moment between brother and sister. She revealed our shame, our guilt. Words were useless. The truth was palpable in the air. "What are you doing?" Her voice was a mixture of shock and pain, a sound that rang through my heart like a death nail. We couldn't answer, our secrets spilling around us like shadows chased away by light. The days that followed were a storm of consequences. The house, once a sanctuary for our games and secrets, became a battlefield of silence and accusatory stares. Our mother cried tears of disappointment that felt like blows to me. Our parents tried to understand, to guide us, but the gap between us had become a chasm. They sent us to a therapist, but the sessions only underscored the gravity of our mistake, the impossibility of going back. The relationship between my brother and me was severed, not by decision, but by necessity. Every encounter was tense now, the words between us becoming mines we feared would detonate. Eventually, he decided to leave, to walk away, so we could all heal. The day he left, I felt a part of me leave with him, but I knew it was the only way to save what was left of our family today. I live with this scar, this confession that I carry like a burden. Understand, now that what seemed like a forbidden game of love was actually a tragedy in the making, and every night in the silence of my room I relive those moments, no longer with the thrill of excitement, but with the pain of what we lost, what we destroyed today. Looking back, I see, with painful clarity, how dangerous our adventure was, not only for us, but for everyone around us. What we did those moments, stolen under the cover of night, was not only an act of defiance against the rules of society, but a betrayal of family trust and love. The message I want to convey here is clear and poignant. This kind of relationship is not only immoral, it is destructive. It destroys bonds, it destroys lives, and it leaves a trail of pain and regret I forbid you to follow. This path, the consequences are far greater than any fleeting pleasure you might get from it. You risk losing the trust of those who love you, breaking hearts, and finding yourself isolated. In a labyrinth of shame and guilt. The dangers are many. The guilt that eats away at the soul, the loss of innocence, and the possibility of deeply hurting those you care about. The consequences can be family disintegration, broken relationships that can never be repaired, and a loneliness that not even time can heal. If you find yourself in a similar situation, or are considering following such a path, I implore you to seek counseling. Talk to someone you trust, a friend, a counselor, someone who can help you see beyond the present moment, beyond the illusion of forbidden love. Learn from my mistake. Don't let desire blind you to the irreparable damage you can. Seek to build relationships based on respect, understanding, and true love, not on the transgression. and seduction of the forbidden. The moral of this story is educational. True love does not destroy, it builds. It does not hide in the shadows, it shines in the open. Do not repeat my mistakes, instead. Seek to live a life where you can look those you love in the eye without shame, where every action is taken with awareness and respect for others. And yourself, please, don't do what I did. Seek guidance, seek the light, and choose the path of morality and respect. Thank you for watching this video. Until the end, subscribe to this channel, Husrels, to discover exclusive confessions like to encourage. Revelations, comment to share your opinions. Activate the bell so you don't miss a second of drama, and most importantly, share this video so the whole world can immerse itself in these captivating intrigues. Together, we explore the mysteries of love and betrayal, one secret at a time. The weight of secrets has a way of pulling people closer and tearing them apart at the same time. In a world where boundaries were meant to keep us safe, we dared to cross them. But now, every glance, every touch feels like walking on the edge of a cliff. Will our secret bind us forever? Or will it destroy everything we know? Stay tuned, because this is just the beginning of a story that will leave you breathless.